a simple gate dispute or a ruthless power play when a corrupt HOA president and her cronies think they can bully and intimidate me into submission. They have no idea who they're messing with, because I'm not just another homeowner they can push around. I'm the one willing to expose every dirty secret they've tried to bury. What follows is a clash of power, deception, and relentless pursuit of justice. And let me tell you, the twists that unfold will leave you questioning everything. This fight isn't just about protecting my home, it's about taking down a tyrant. Ready to see how far I'll go to reclaim what's mine? Let me know what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. The knock at my door was sharp and demanding, a sound that cut through the quiet of my Sunday afternoon like a blade. I was in the middle of washing dishes, trying to enjoy what little peace I had earned after a grueling week at work. But that sound, the insistent, rapid thumping, made me drop the sponge and dry my hands with a rag. It felt like a harbinger of trouble, the kind that worms its way into your bones before you even understand why. When I opened the door, I found Linda Whitaker standing on my porch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She wore her usual pristine white blouse and pearl necklace, the ones she always seemed to have on at community meetings, like she was dressing for an eternal job interview. Linda's sharp blue eyes flicked over me with the same distaste I'd seen her use on overgrown lawns and unapproved paint colors. It was as if I were already guilty of some crime I hadn't yet committed. "David," she began without preamble, her voice clipped and icy, "the board met last night." Her presence alone was enough to make me grit my teeth, but it was the smug, rehearsed tone that made my stomach twist. Linda had been the head of the Fairhaven Oaks Homeowners Association for as long as anyone could remember, and she ruled it like a dictator, masked behind the veil of community service. "Good afternoon, Linda," I replied, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "What brings you here?" Her smile was more of a smirk. "Your gate. It's become a problem." I stared at her, already sensing where this conversation was heading. I had installed that gate only a few months prior after waking up to find empty beer cans, broken glass, and once, a rusted fishhook near the shoreline of my property. The lake was beautiful Bearstone Lake, sparkling like glass on a sunny day, but it was also private. My private property, according to the deed I'd scrutinized half a dozen times before making any modifications. "The board received multiple complaints," Linda continued, her voice clipped. "Apparently, your gate is obstructing community access to the lake. It needs to be addressed immediately." I folded my arms, mirroring her posture. I made sure everything was within my rights before installing that gate. The path leading down to the lake crosses my property. There's no easement, no community right of way. It's private land, Linda. She gave me a look that was half pity, half scorn. That may be true from a legal standpoint, but we have something called tradition here, David. Fairhaven Oaks has always considered that trail community access. You've made things very inconvenient for everyone. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. They'd been treating my property like a public park, traipsing through whenever they pleased, leaving garbage, stomping down my flower beds, and sometimes making enough noise late at night to send my dog, Max, into a fit of barking. When I installed the gate, I was simply putting an end to their abuse of my land. I hadn't thought I'd be starting a war. Linda, I've tried to be reasonable. I posted signs. I even spoke to a few of the neighbors about it, but people kept treating my property like it was open access. I had to do something. Her smile returned, tighter this time. The board has ways of dealing with difficult homeowners, David. Ways that can make your life unpleasant. Is that a threat? I asked, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. It's an opportunity, she replied smoothly. We can resolve this peacefully. If you simply provide the board with a key to your gate, we'll ensure the community has access to the lake, and you can avoid further complications. I shook my head, my frustration bubbling over. I'm not giving you a key, Linda. That gate is there for a reason. It's my property, and I have every right to secure it. Property rights are one thing. Community harmony is another, Linda said with a condescending air. The board voted unanimously last night. You are required to provide us with a key to the gate, effective immediately. I'm not required to do anything, I shot back, the anger now burning hot in my chest. I consulted with the county before putting up the gate. I had the property surveyed, and I spoke to my lawyer, Frank Mason, just to make sure everything was legal. There's no easement, Linda, no right-of-way. It's my land. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. This isn't just about legality, David. It's about respect for the community. If you can't understand that, then the board will have to take further action. Like what? I challenged. Fining me? Harassing me? Making up violations to force me into compliance? Linda's smile returned, more wolfish than before. If necessary, yes. You wouldn't be the first homeowner to face penalties for disrupting the community's interests. What you're doing is extortion, I said, my voice steady despite the fury boiling under the surface. And I won't be bullied. Extortion? She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I'm offering you a way to avoid trouble. Give us a key, and all of this goes away. All of what? The complaints, the fines, the assessments. We can keep this civil, or we can take it to the next level. Your choice. I reached into my pocket, pulled out one of Frank's business cards, and handed it to her. If the board wants to discuss this further, they can contact my attorney. She took the card between two fingers as if it were something filthy. You're making a mistake, she said softly. The board doesn't lose, David. We always get what we want. She turned on her heel and marched down the driveway, her shoes clicking against the pavement with a precision that felt mechanical. I stood in the doorway, fists clenched, the interaction leaving a sour taste in my mouth. I had followed the rules, done everything by the book, but Linda's tone, her smug certainty, left me uneasy. It was as if she already had a plan, one that didn't involve following the rules at all. The rest of the day was a fog of frustration and anxiety. That night, I double-checked the lock on my gate before heading inside. As I turned off the porch light, I couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep into my bones. Something told me this was only the beginning. I didn't realize it then, but I just made an enemy far more dangerous than I could have ever anticipated. It was well past midnight when I heard my phone vibrate on the nightstand beside my bed. The sharp, urgent buzz jolted me from a restless sleep. At first, I thought it was just another late-night telemarketer or some spam notification. But then I remembered the security system, the one I had just installed to monitor the gate after Linda's thinly veiled threats. I fumbled for my phone, hands trembling with a mix of fatigue and unease. The screen glowed with a notification from the app, motion detected at gate entrance. My pulse quickened as I opened the feed, my eyes straining to adjust to the grainy black and white video. 3 figures stood at the gate, their shapes dark and shadowy against the pale glow of the security lights. I squinted, trying to make out who they were. As the camera adjusted, their identities became clear. Linda was there, unmistakable even in the hazy footage. Her sharp, angular posture and blonde hair pulled back tightly were as recognizable as ever. Beside her stood Peter Adams, the HOA treasurer, a balding man with glasses who always seemed to be skulking around like he had something to hide. And then there was Mark Talbot, the facilities manager, a man whose gruff demeanor and penchant for enforcing petty rules made him more of a nuisance than a helper. Peter was holding something metal, its surface gleaming under the faint glow of the porch light. Bolt cutters. My chest tightened as I watched him maneuver them toward the lock I had installed just weeks ago. Linda stood there with her arms folded, nodding as if giving her approval to the crime unfolding in front of her. I hit the record button on the app, capturing every second of their trespassing. They were actually trying to break into my property. Linda had made her threats sound like mere warnings before, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. They were crossing the line from harassment into outright criminal activity. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. There are people at my gate trying to break in. I have security footage. Yes, they're using bolt cutters. I rattled off my address, my eyes never leaving the screen. Stay inside, sir. We're dispatching an officer to your location, the dispatcher replied, her voice calm and professional. I hung up and kept my eyes glued to the screen, watching as Mark glanced nervously over his shoulder. He seemed anxious, as if he knew what they were doing was wrong. Peter, on the other hand, looked almost smug, like he'd been waiting for this opportunity. Linda's expression remained cool and composed, her hands clasped in front of her like she was overseeing a routine HOA inspection. I watched them fumble with the lock for another minute before giving up. Peter cursed and tossed the bolt cutters to the ground, clearly frustrated. Linda's lips moved, her words lost to the grainy silence of the video feed. Whatever she said made Mark glance at her with widened eyes before he hurriedly retrieved the bolt cutters, and they retreated down the driveway. Linda was the last to leave, her gaze lingering on the gate as if daring it to defy her. The footage ended, but the adrenaline in my veins refused to subside. I threw on a pair of jeans and a hoodie, my hands shaking as I struggled with the zipper. By the time I made it downstairs, headlights were already sweeping across my driveway. I opened the door to find Officer Ryan Curtis standing on my porch, flashlight in hand. His tall frame was silhouetted against the dark sky, his expression serious but not unfriendly. I had met him once before during a minor neighborhood dispute over noise complaints. He seemed fair-minded and thorough, traits I hoped would work in my favor tonight. "Sir, we got a call about a potential break-in," he said, his voice low but steady. "Yes, Officer Curtis. I have security footage of the HOA board members trying to cut my lock." I handed him my phone, the screen still glowing with the paused footage. He watched the video, his brows drawing together in concern. "This is Linda Whitaker?" he asked, pointing at the woman in the footage. "Yeah, that's her. And Peter Adams and Mark Talbot, they tried to break through my gate. I just installed it last month after dealing with trespassers and trash left on my property." My words tumbled out in a rush, my frustration and fear mingling into a hot, tangled mess. Officer Curtis nodded. "All right, let's take a look at the gate." We walked around the side of the house, the cool night air brushing against my face like ice. As we approached the gate, his flashlight beam danced over the metal lock, revealing deep scratches where the bolt cutters had clearly bitten into the steel. The damage wasn't severe, but it was enough to prove their intentions. "Looks like they didn't get through," Officer Curtis said, crouching down to inspect the lock. "But they definitely tried. They were trespassing on my property," I insisted, my anger flaring up again, "and they were prepared to destroy my property to get their way." He straightened up and made some notes on his notepad. "I'll need to file a report. This is attempted breaking and entering, possibly vandalism." "Did you say you had the entire incident recorded?" "Yes. I recorded everything from the moment they showed up until they left." He nodded approvingly. "Good. That's solid evidence. I'm going to need a copy of that footage for the report. And I'd recommend you keep your cameras running at all times. Something tells me this isn't over." "Believe me, officer, I already planned on that." As he continued jotting down notes, headlights washed over us again. This time, it was a silver SUV that pulled up to the curb. The door swung open, and out stepped Linda, followed by Peter and Mark. It was as if they had been summoned by the police lights, determined to spin the narrative their way. "Officer," Linda called out, her voice syrupy sweet, but with a hard edge that made my skin crawl. "Thank goodness you're here. We were just checking on community property that this homeowner has illegally blocked off." Officer Curtis's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, according to county records, this is private property. You were recorded attempting to damage a lock on this man's gate. That's attempted breaking and entering." Linda's eyes narrowed. "This is an HOA matter, not a police matter. We have bylaws that need to be enforced." Bylaws don't override state law, ma'am, Officer Curtis replied firmly. I suggest you consult with your HOA attorney before taking any further action that could be considered criminal trespassing or vandalism. Linda's smile faltered. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. Peter mumbled something under his breath, while Mark looked like he wanted to bolt back to his car. Officer Curtis handed me his card. Keep that camera running, and if they come back, call us immediately. I watched him leave, feeling a small measure of relief but knowing this was far from over. Linda was the type who would push and push until she got what she wanted. But now I had evidence, and I intended to use it. The next morning, I woke up to a pounding headache that had nothing to do with sleep deprivation and everything to do with anger. The events of the night before replayed in my mind like some twisted, surreal movie. Linda, Peter, and Mark had actually tried to break into my property. Not just some vague, petty complaint or legal posturing, an actual attempt to destroy my lock and trespass. It was blatant, aggressive, and utterly insane. I made coffee, my hands still trembling with the residual fury. As I sipped the scalding brew, my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. When I glanced at the screen, my stomach clenched. Emails. From the HOA. I opened the first one. Subject, violation notice, improper mailbox height. The email went on to detail how my mailbox did not comply with the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. Apparently, it was an inch too short, an absurd claim since I had installed it exactly to the specifications I had been provided when I bought the house. Another email arrived as I was still reading the first. Subject, violation notice, unauthorized garden lighting. This one accused me of installing outdoor lighting without proper approval from the HOA's Architectural Review Committee. I'd put up a few solar lights along my walkway, the kind you stick into the ground without any real installation. They were simple, harmless, and frankly, none of the HOA's business. Before I could even open the third email, my phone pinged again and again. One after another, the messages flooded in. Hedge height violation, improperly painted door, unauthorized bird feeder. I scrolled through the notifications, each new violation more ridiculous than the last. They were piling up so quickly, I could barely keep track. By the time I'd made it to the bottom of my inbox, I counted 5 separate violation notices, each accompanied by a threat of daily fines if the so-called infractions were not corrected immediately. It was harassment, pure and simple. I dialed Frank's number, my lawyer's voice groggy but attentive as he answered. David? It's 7:30 in the morning. What's going on? They're retaliating, I said, pacing my kitchen. I called the cops last night on Linda and her cronies for trying to break my gate. And now I've got 5 separate violation notices in my inbox. It's a coordinated attack. Send me everything, Frank said, his tone turning from sleepy to serious. Document everything. Dates, times, the emails. Forward them all to me. And keep your security cameras running. That's the plan, I replied, already tapping through my phone to forward the messages. But they're trying to bury me under paperwork and fines. What can I do? Well, the good news is, what they're doing could be considered retaliatory harassment. The bad news is, proving that can be tricky. But the more evidence you gather, the better your case. I'll start drafting a cease and desist letter today. In the meantime, stay vigilant. And for the love of God, don't respond to their emails. Everything should go through me from now on. I thanked him and ended the call, my head pounding with the onset of a migraine. This was exactly what Linda had meant when she warned me about making things difficult. They couldn't force me to hand over the key to my gate, so they were going to drown me in red tape until I either gave up or lost everything. The next few days were a nightmare. The violations continued to arrive at an alarming rate. I started keeping a spreadsheet, logging each notice along with the date and time it was sent. The list grew so fast that I could barely keep up. Every morning, my phone would chime with new emails from the HOA. It became a twisted routine. Wake up, check for violations, forward them to Frank, then spend the day feeling like a man under siege. I couldn't enjoy my own property. Every time I stepped outside, I half expected to find Linda lurking by the gate, clipboard in hand, ready to conjure up new reasons to find me. Then the phone calls started, a number I didn't recognize at first, but quickly learned to dread. I answered once, and only once. "Hello? David, this is Peter Adams, the HOA treasurer," came the oily voice on the other end of the line. "We need to discuss your growing list of violations." "There's nothing to discuss," I snapped. "You're targeting me because I wouldn't hand over a key to my gate. This is harassment." "Harassment?" Peter chuckled, the sound low and smug. "We're merely enforcing community standards. You've been flagrantly disregarding the HOA's guidelines. All we're trying to do is bring you into compliance." I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I'm forwarding everything to my lawyer. If you have anything to say, you can say it to him." "Lawyers are expensive," Peter replied, his tone as slick as oil. "Are you sure you want to go down that road? It'd be much simpler to just hand over the key. Save yourself a lot of trouble." "I'm done talking to you," I snapped, and ended the call before he could say anything else. I blocked his number immediately, but the calls continued from other numbers. Linda, Mark, even a few board members I'd never met. It was like they were all taking turns trying to wear me down. The worst part wasn't even the harassment itself. It was the way they twisted everything around to make me look like the unreasonable one. Linda had clearly rallied her allies, painting me as the stubborn, antisocial homeowner standing in the way of the community's so-called progress. I was still sifting through the latest batch of violations when a knock came at the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin, expecting to find Linda or Peter ready to escalate things even further. But when I opened the door, I was met by the kindly, wrinkled face of Grace Harmon, my elderly neighbor from down the street. "David," she said, her voice low and urgent, "I had to come talk to you. They're turning the neighborhood against you." I stared at her, stunned. Grace was one of the few people in Fairhaven Oaks who had never given me grief about the gate. She kept to herself mostly, tending her roses and walking her little terrier. The fact that she'd come to my door spoke volumes. "They're lying, David," Grace whispered, "telling people you're blocking off public property, even though I know that trail's always been private. I've lived here for 25 years. I know what they're doing. And I'm not the only one." "What do you mean?" I asked, my pulse quickening. People are starting to see through Linda's games. And some of us, we want to help. I felt a glimmer of hope pierce through the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't fighting this battle alone. I spent the next few hours talking with Grace over coffee in my kitchen, her hands wrapped around the steaming mug like it was her only source of warmth. It was strange, seeing her there, this woman who had mostly kept to herself for years. Grace had always seemed more like a fixture of the neighborhood than an active participant, content to tend to her garden and take slow, measured walks with her little dog, Buddy. But there she was, sitting in my kitchen, her eyes flashing with a fierceness I hadn't known she possessed. "What they're doing to you is just plain wrong," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Linda's been running this neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom for years, but this is a new low, even for her." I nodded, still processing everything Grace had told me. According to her, Linda had been spreading rumors about me all over the neighborhood, painting me as some antisocial recluse who wanted to lock everyone out of their beloved lake. The meetings had turned into little more than smear campaigns, designed to rile up the neighbors and turn them against me. "Some people are swallowing her nonsense whole," Grace continued, her lips pursed in disapproval. "But not everyone. There are more of us than you think who are tired of her bullying. People who are afraid to speak up because they don't want to be targeted like you are." "She's targeting me because I stood up to her," I said bitterly, "because I wouldn't just hand over the key like she demanded." Grace nodded slowly. "Exactly. But she's also targeting you because you're making her look bad. Linda's built her whole reputation on being this perfect leader who always knows what's best for the community. But the truth is, she's only interested in control. I took a sip of my coffee, my hands still trembling slightly from all the adrenaline and anger that had been coursing through me since last night. So what do? I can't keep playing her game. She's already bombarding me with violations and fines. I can't even keep up. Then don't play her game, Grace said, her voice suddenly firm. Play your own. I raised an eyebrow. What does that even mean? It means you need to stop reacting to her and start fighting back, Grace replied. You've got evidence, don't you? Security footage of them trying to break your lock? Records of all the harassment? Yes, I admitted. But it feels like I'm just one person fighting against a whole damn committee. You're not alone, Grace said, her eyes glinting. I've spoken to a few others, people who are sick of Linda's tactics, and I've been doing some digging of my own. I stared at her, surprised. What kind of digging? Financial records, she whispered, her voice dropping conspiratorially. I've been attending every HOA meeting for the last 5 years, taking notes, asking questions. The problem is, they never provide full financial statements, just summaries. And I've noticed some irregularities. What kind of irregularities? I asked, my curiosity now piqued. Money going missing. Does being raised for supposed maintenance projects that never actually happen. Like that lake access improvement Linda claims to be fighting so hard to protect. Grace shook her head. They've been collecting extra money for that for years. But I haven't seen a single improvement made to the lake path. Have you? No, I said slowly. But I never really paid attention to that sort of thing. I just figured, I don't know, that it wasn't my business. That's what they count on, Grace said, her gaze sharp. People being too busy or too afraid to question them. But I've been keeping records. And I'm not the only one. My mind was racing now, the pieces slowly starting to click together. It wasn't just about my gate. This was something bigger, something deeper. Grace, are you saying? You think they're stealing from the HOA? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't prove it. Not yet, she admitted. But I think you can, with your footage, your records, and everything I've been documenting. We might just have enough to take them down. My pulse quickened. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of real hope. A path forward. Why are you helping me? I asked suddenly. You could have just stayed quiet, kept your head down like everyone else. Grace's expression softened. Because I'm tired of bullies, David, and because I'm tired of being afraid. When my husband passed away a few years back, I tried to make some changes to my property. Just little things, adding a garden bench, replacing the old fence. And Linda shot down every request. Fined me when I did it anyway. I ended up having to sell off a piece of my property just to pay her damn fines. I felt a pang of guilt. I hadn't known. I'd always seen Grace as this quiet, unassuming woman who kept to herself. I hadn't realized she'd been suffering under Linda's thumb just like me. I'm sorry, I said, my voice heavy. Don't be sorry. Be angry. And be smart. Grace leaned forward, her gaze intense. You can't let her win, David. Because if she wins, she'll just keep doing this. To you. To me. To anyone who dares to stand up to her. I nodded, my resolve hardening. So, what do we do? First, we gather everything. All the footage you've taken, all the violation notices. Everything Linda has thrown at you. Grace reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila folder, stuffed with papers. And I'll add all the notes I've been taking for the last 5 years. Then we make sure people know the truth. And how do we do that, I asked. An emergency meeting, one you call, one where you present the evidence to everyone. They've only been hearing Linda's side of things. It's time they heard yours. I stared at Grace, stunned. The idea was bold, risky, but it also made perfect sense. All right, I said finally. Let's do it. Grace smiled for the first time since she'd walked through my door. It was a small smile, but it was full of determination. Good, she said. Now, let's get to work. We spent the rest of the day poring over everything I had gathered. The violation notices, the emails, the footage of Linda and her cronies trying to cut my lock. Grace's meticulous notes stretched back years, documenting countless inconsistencies and suspicious financial transactions. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the kitchen. But I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. And maybe, just maybe, a fighting chance. The next morning, I awoke with a renewed sense of determination. Grace had lit a fire under me, and I wasn't about to let it die out. But determination alone wouldn't be enough. I needed proof. And more importantly, I needed allies. Grace's support was invaluable, but if I was going to take on Linda and her cronies, I couldn't do it alone. I spent the first part of the morning combing through every violation notice, email, and correspondence the HOA had sent me. Each letter was carefully printed and filed away, with digital copies saved to both my computer and a cloud drive. Grace had been right. Linda's pattern of harassment was becoming increasingly clear. The sudden influx of violation notices right after I refused to hand over my gate. Key wasn't just petty retaliation. It was a deliberate campaign designed to force me into submission. I logged every violation, noting the dates, and matching them up with my conversations with Linda. It was almost laughable how obvious the pattern was when laid out this way. Every time I pushed back, a new violation would appear in my inbox within a day or two. By the end of my organizing spree, I had over 20 separate notices, all within the last month alone. Grace showed up just before noon, a determined look on her face and her trusty old laptop tucked under one arm. "I've been making some calls," she said, as she walked into my kitchen without waiting for an invitation. "Turns out, I'm not the only one Linda's been targeting." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" Grace's voice was fierce. "I spoke to Mary Sanders. She's the one who tried to put up a greenhouse last year and got fined into the ground for not getting proper approval. Except she did. She has the emails to prove it. Linda just lost them and then hit her with fines until Mary gave up and tore the greenhouse down." "Unbelievable," I muttered. But deep down, I wasn't surprised. Then there's Paul Jefferson. He had a swing set built for his grandkids, and Linda claimed it violated the height restrictions, forced him to take it down, even though nothing in the guidelines actually forbids it. He lost nearly $2,000 over that. Jesus. I ran a hand through my hair. So it's not just me. It never was. Grace's smile was thin and grim. But the difference is, you're fighting back. And that's scaring the hell out of her. We sat down at the kitchen table, papers and laptops spread out before us like we were preparing for some kind of trial. And maybe, in a way, we were. "Linda's whole strategy is intimidation," Grace continued. "She keeps everyone so busy dealing with these bogus violations that they never have the time or energy to question her authority. And if someone does fight back, she buries them under so much paperwork and fines that they eventually just give up. Or go broke," I added bitterly. "She tried to fine me $500 for improper security modifications, just because I installed a damn gate on my own property. Which, by the way, you have every legal right to do," Grace said, her eyes flashing with anger. "But Linda doesn't care about legality. She cares about control." We spent the rest of the afternoon compiling everything. Grace shared her own files with me, meticulous notes she had kept over the years. Meeting minutes, financial statements, at least the ones Linda had bothered to provide, and records of fines and dues increases. As I flipped through the spreadsheets Grace had assembled, something caught my eye. "Wait a minute," I said, my fingers pausing over a column of numbers. "Look at this." Grace leaned over, her eyes narrowing as she examined the page. "What am I looking at? Maintenance fees. According to this, the HOA has been charging everyone extra dues for lake access maintenance for the last 3 years. "That's right," Grace nodded. "Linda sold it as a way to improve the path leading down to the lake. Said it needed new gravel, lighting, signage, but as far as I can tell, nothing's been done." "Nothing's been done," I repeated. "And yet the charges keep coming." Grace's fingers danced over her laptop's keyboard. her eyes darting back and forth as she scrolled through her records. "David, look at this. The amounts don't match up. Linda's collecting more than what's being reported on the financial summaries." "More? How much more?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "Thousands," Grace said, her voice tight. "Tens of thousands, actually, and none of it's being accounted for." I stared at her, my mind racing. "You think she's embezzling from the HOA?" "I think it's more than just a suspicion," Grace replied. "But if we're going to prove it, we need more than just these numbers. We need testimony. People who have been wronged by her, just like you." "What about Mary and Paul?" I asked. "Would they be willing to speak up?" "Maybe. But it's going to take more than a couple of disgruntled homeowners to make a case against her. We need to rally as many people as possible, and we need to do it soon." I nodded, feeling the weight of the task settle onto my shoulders. "What do you suggest?" "We call an emergency meeting," Grace said, her eyes blazing with determination. "One where Linda can't control the narrative, where everyone can see the truth for themselves." "You really think they'll listen?" I asked, my doubt creeping in. "They'll listen," Grace assured me. "Especially once we show them the footage of Linda and her goons trying to break into your gate. And once they hear from other people who've been targeted, it's time to shine a light on all of this." I glanced down at the stacks of paper spread across the table. This was bigger than me, bigger than my gate or my property rights. This was about exposing something rotten at the core of our community. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Let's do it." Grace smiled, a real smile this time. "Good. Because I already started spreading the word. There's going to be a meeting tomorrow night at the community center, and you're going to be the one leading it." My stomach twisted with nerves at the thought, but I forced myself to nod. If this was what it took to put an end to Linda's reign of terror, then so be it. I was ready. The hours leading up to the emergency meeting were some of the longest of my life. I spent the day double-checking every piece of evidence Grace and I had gathered: the violation notices, the security footage of Linda, Peter, and Mark trying to cut through my lock, and Grace's detailed financial records. All of it was meticulously organized, labeled, and ready for presentation. Grace had already spread the word to everyone she trusted, neighbors who'd been wronged by the HOA's overreach, those who had suffered Linda's pettiness and petty tyrannies. She said she'd counted at least a dozen willing to speak up, though how many would actually show their faces tonight remained to be seen. People could be unpredictable, especially when fear and intimidation were involved. By the time the meeting rolled around, I was a bundle of nerves, my stomach twisted, and my hands felt clammy. But Grace's confidence kept me grounded. She was surprisingly efficient, her calm demeanor hiding a mind as sharp as a blade. The years of dealing with Linda had made her cunning in her own quiet way. We arrived at the community center early. The room was already bustling with people, their murmured conversations swirling in the air like static. I recognized some faces, neighbors I'd waved at but never truly spoken to. Others were strangers, but their expressions carried the same frustration I'd been feeling for weeks. I glanced at Grace, who gave me a reassuring nod. "This is your chance, David. Speak the truth. People will listen." I took a deep breath and walked to the front of the room. Grace had secured us the space by appealing to one of the board members who'd grown disillusioned with Linda's leadership. It was a small victory, but one that gave me hope. As I adjusted the laptop to display the files and footage on a makeshift projector screen, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Linda entered the room, followed closely by Peter and Mark. They carried themselves with a smugness that made me want to grind my teeth. Linda's eyes found mine, her smile sharp and icy. "Well, this is quite the turnout," she said, her voice smooth as silk but edged with iron. "Though I have to admit, I wasn't expecting to be invited to this little spectacle." "It's an open meeting," Grace interjected, her voice firm. "Unlike the ones you've been holding without proper notice." Linda's smile faltered just for a moment, but she recovered quickly. I don't appreciate your accusations, Grace. Everything we do is in accordance with the HOA bylaws. We'll see about that, I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. We've gathered evidence of harassment, false violations, and financial mismanagement. People deserve to know the truth. Linda's gaze narrowed. I'm afraid you've been terribly misinformed. I've always acted in the best interest of this community. That's not what it looks like from where I'm standing. I shot back. Before she could reply, one of the residents, a man named Paul Jefferson, stood up. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, with graying hair and a perpetually tired expression. David's right, he said. This isn't just about one man's gate. Linda, you forced me to tear down a swing set I built for my grandkids. Said it violated height restrictions, but there's nothing in the bylaws that supports your claim. Linda's expression stiffened. Every structure must adhere to community standards. Bullshit, Paul snapped, his voice rising. You made it up to punish me, because I didn't support your motion to increase dues last year. You've been targeting anyone who stands up to you. Murmurs spread through the room. Others began to chime in. Their grievances, pouring out like a dam, had finally broken. I was fined for planting flowers that weren't on your approved list. You charged me $100 for leaving my garbage can out an hour too long. You threatened to foreclose on my property over a bird feeder. Linda's eyes darted around the room, her composure slipping. But Peter stepped forward, his voice loud and dismissive. This is nothing but a smear campaign. A few disgruntled homeowners looking to blame the board for their own failures to comply with community standards. Is that what you call breaking into someone's property with bolt cutters? I asked, projecting the footage of their failed break in attempt onto the screen. The room went silent. Linda's face went white, and Peter's mouth hung open. Even Mark looked like he'd swallowed his own tongue. This footage was taken 2 nights ago, I continued, my voice steady. Linda, Peter, and Mark tried to break through the gate I legally installed to protect my property. When they couldn't cut through the lock, they fled. And now, the same people who tried to break into my property are sending me violation notices on a daily basis, trying to pressure me into handing over a key. This is outrageous, Linda sputtered, her voice high-pitched and strained. That video is doctored. This is nothing but a desperate attempt to undermine the board's authority. It's real, Grace said, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife, and it's not the only evidence we have. For years, you've been charging us for lake access maintenance that never happened. I have the financial records right here. She held up a thick binder filled with pages of meticulously documented discrepancies. Paul stepped forward again. You've been bleeding us dry, Linda. And for what? So you can line your own pockets? This meeting is over, Linda snapped, her composure completely shattered. Anyone who continues to speak against the board will face consequences. That sounds like another threat, I said, my anger rising. But this time, you won't get away with it. We're done being bullied. From now on, the community will be run by the people, not by a dictator. The room erupted into applause. Faces I had never seen before were nodding, clapping, and offering words of support. It was like a wave, building momentum with every passing second. Linda, Peter, and Mark made a hasty exit, their faces twisted with fury and disbelief. For the first time, they seemed truly afraid. And maybe, just maybe, I had finally turned the tide. But as I looked out over the crowd of angry, energized residents, I realized this was only the beginning. The real fight was yet to come. The community meeting felt like a small victory, but as Grace and I left the building, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Linda, Peter, and Mark had stormed out like children caught cheating at a game, their faces twisted with fury and disbelief. But it was the anger in Linda's eyes that haunted me, most an anger not born of frustration, but of fear of losing control. Grace noticed my silence as we walked through the cool night air back to my house. "What's bothering you?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp with concern. "I don't know," I admitted. I guess I thought they'd put up more of a fight. Instead, they just ran off, like they were regrouping. They probably are, Grace said with a shrug. Bullies rarely quit after the first punch. But you rattled them tonight, made them realize their power isn't absolute. I'm not sure I rattled them enough. I unlocked my front door and let Grace inside. We made our way to the kitchen, where the remnants of our strategy session still cluttered the table files. Receipts, copies of violation notices, all scattered like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't quite able to solve. Grace set her purse down and eyed me warily. David, you exposed their lies in front of the entire community. That's not something they'll just shrug off. It'll take time for people to process everything, but I'd bet money that a lot of them walked away tonight with their eyes opened. I hope you're right, I said, pouring us both cups of coffee. The act was becoming something of a ritual for us, midnight coffee over stacks of paperwork, our voices growing tense and hoarse as the hours slipped by. But I can't help feeling like we missed something. Linda's been running the HOA for years. She's not going to just roll over. Grace blew on her coffee before taking a sip. You're right. Which is why we can't let our guard down. We've got the community on our side now, but Linda's going to do everything she can to tear that apart. I leaned against the counter, staring into the dark swirl of my coffee. She's going to come after me harder than ever. She will, Grace agreed. But you're ready for her this time. And you're not alone. Her words gave me some comfort, but not enough. I spent the next few days on edge, checking my security cameras every hour and half expecting another avalanche of violation notices to flood my inbox. But the harassment didn't come. The silence was unnerving. Linda had gone quiet. No emails, no phone calls, no threats. Even the usual HOA newsletters had dried up. It was as if she had retreated into some dark corner to plot her next move. And I knew, deep down, that whatever she was planning would be worse than anything that had come before. Then the letter came. I found it in my mailbox one rainy afternoon. A plain white envelope addressed to me in neat, precise handwriting. No return address, no HOA letterhead, just my name, scrawled across the front like some sinister invitation. I tore it open with shaking hands, my heart pounding as I unfolded the letter. David, you've made a terrible mistake. You may have swayed a few gullible neighbors, but the board is still the governing body of this community. We will not tolerate your slanderous accusations or your attempts to undermine our authority. If you persist in this ridiculous crusade, you will find yourself facing consequences far worse than fines and violation notices. Consider this your final warning. Sincerely, the board of Fairhaven Oaks. My blood ran cold. The letter was typed, its tone clinical and cold, but I had no doubt who had written it. Linda. She was trying to intimidate me, to push me back into submission, and for a brief, shameful moment, I felt the urge to do exactly that. Grace came over later that evening, and I showed her the letter. She read it twice, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. It's just another scare tactic, she said, though her voice trembled slightly. She's running out of options, so she's trying to rattle you. Well, it's working, I admitted. Every time I think I'm making progress, Linda finds some new way to mess with me. What's worse, she's completely disappeared. It's like she's planning something. Maybe she is, Grace said, her gaze distant. But that doesn't mean you have to wait for her to make her move. We've got evidence. Enough to take this higher than the HOA. We need to go to the county office, get copies of all the property records, maybe even speak to the zoning officials. If we can prove Linda's been fabricating violations and misusing funds, we'll have a case against her. It made sense. And more importantly, it gave me something to do besides wait around like a sitting duck. The following morning, Grace and I drove to the county clerk's office. It was a drab, soulless building with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. The clerk behind the desk looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat and indifferent. "I'm trying to get copies of the property records for Fairhaven Oaks," I said. particularly the sections concerning the lake access path. The clerk raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty specific request. What's it for? An HOA dispute? I replied, my voice carefully measured. I'm trying to verify some claims about public access to a private property. She sighed and gestured to a stack of forms on the counter. Fill these out. It'll take at least a week to process. A week? I nearly groaned. There's no way to speed it up? If you have a lawyer make the request, it might go faster, the clerk said, her tone suggesting she'd had this conversation more times than she cared to remember. But otherwise, you're at the mercy of the county's bureaucracy. I filled out the forms. Anyway, my frustration simmering just below the surface. Grace tried to reassure me as we walked back to the car. Even if it takes a week, it's worth it. Linda can't hide from the truth forever. That's the problem, I said, my voice tight. She's not hiding. She's just waiting. And I can't shake the feeling she's going to hit back harder than ever. Grace didn't have an answer for that. And neither did I. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and frustration. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the letter, to Linda's threat. It was like a dark cloud hanging over me, pressing down until I could barely breathe. I was still thinking about it when my phone rang late that night. It was Grace. David, you need to check the HOA's online portal. Right now. What? Why? They're holding a vote to put a lien on your property, and they're not even notifying you about it. My chest tightened. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. Sleep had been a lost cause after Grace's call the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Linda and her cronies voting to place a lien on my house, stripping me of the one thing I had fought so hard to protect. It was the kind of fear that clawed at your stomach, leaving you nauseous and trembling. I checked my email first thing, my fingers trembling as I tapped through the inbox. And there it was, a notification from the Fairhaven Oaks Homeowners Association marked with the word urgent in bold red letters. Subject, notification of emergency vote. The message was curt, almost mechanical in its phrasing. It stated that the board had held an emergency vote to place a lien on my property due to my numerous unresolved violations and failure to comply with community standards. No mention of the ongoing investigation, no mention of my attempts to contest the violations. Just a simple, brutal declaration of intent to ruin me. The kicker? The vote had been held the previous night, less than an hour after Grace had called me. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. Linda was making her move, and she wasn't holding back. This was no longer just about harassing me or trying to force me into submission. This was about tearing me down piece by piece until I had nothing left. I called Frank, my lawyer, the second I could force myself to speak without sounding like a panicked lunatic. They did what? Frank's voice was a low growl, his anger palpable, even over the phone. They held a vote, an emergency vote. They're trying to put a lien on my house, I said, my words tumbling over each other. That's illegal, Frank snapped. They can't just declare a lien without due process, and they certainly can't do it without notifying you properly. Well, they did, I said, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into my bones. What can I do about it? Fight back, Frank replied without hesitation. They're playing dirty because they know they're losing. Linda is trying to scare you into backing down, but if you stand your ground, you can take her down. I've been standing my ground, Frank, and it's only made things worse. That's because you're playing defense, he countered. It's time to go on the offensive. I'll file an injunction to stop the lien from being enforced. And I'm going to make sure everyone on that board knows they're not above the law. What about the county records, I asked. Grace and I went down there yesterday, but they said it would take at least a week to process. I can expedite that, Frank said. It'll cost extra, but we can't afford to wait around while Linda digs her claws in deeper. Do whatever you have to do, I replied, my voice hoarse. I'm done letting her walk all over me. Frank's response was swift and efficient. By midday, he had already filed the injunction and sent a formal letter of complaint to the board. He warned me it wouldn't stop Linda from trying to escalate things, but at least it would buy me some time. I spent the rest of the day pacing my house like a caged animal, my anxiety growing with every passing hour. The silence from the HOA was almost worse than the constant harassment. It felt like the calm before a storm, a brewing tempest that I couldn't prepare for because I didn't know where it would strike next. That evening, Grace came by with a look of determination etched into her face. "We need to get ahead of this," she said as soon as I let her in. "If we wait for Linda to make her next move, she'll just keep stacking the deck against you." "What do you suggest?" I asked, already bracing myself for whatever scheme she had cooked up. "We need to expose her," Grace said, her voice trembling with the force of her conviction. "Completely. Publicly. She's counting on the fact that most of the community is too scared or too apathetic to challenge her authority. But if we make them see what she's been doing, really see it, they'll have no choice but to stand with us." "And how do we do that?" I asked, skeptical but desperate enough to listen. "We go to the press," Grace replied, her eyes blazing with determination. "Local news, online forums, social media. We hit her from every angle. Make sure the whole city knows what's been happening here." "Would that even work?" I asked, my doubt heavy in my chest. "Linda's got connections. She could bury us before we even make a dent." "She can't bury the truth," Grace insisted. "And the truth is that she's been stealing from this community for years. She's been abusing her power, intimidating anyone who dares to stand up to her. People will listen, David. They just need to be shown what's really happening." I looked at her, seeing the raw passion in her eyes. Grace had more faith in this fight than I did, and maybe that was exactly what I needed. "Okay," I said, feeling a spark of hope reignite within me. "Let's do it." Grace wasted no time. She reached out to a local reporter she knew, someone who had a reputation for exposing corruption and holding the powerful accountable. The reporter's name was James Holloway, and from the moment Grace described our situation to him, he was hooked. We met James the next morning at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. He was a wiry man in his early 30s with dark hair, sharp eyes, and an intensity that bordered on obsession. "I've been covering corrupt HOAs for years," he said, his voice low and steady. "It's a dirty business. People get power and suddenly think they're above the law. Your story sounds like it has all the makings of a real scandal." "We've got evidence," Grace said, her fingers wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. "Emails, financial records, video footage of them trying to break into David's property." James's eyebrows shot up. "Video footage? That's gold. And if you've got proof of financial mismanagement, that's even better." "We need to stop Linda before she ruins David's life," Grace said, her voice trembling with urgency. "Let me handle it," James replied. "I'll write the piece, but I need more than just your word. I need testimony from other residents, people willing to speak out on the record." "Can you do that?" I asked Grace, my eyes darting between her and James. "I'll make sure of it," Grace replied, her voice steady. "People are ready to talk. They just need to know they're not alone." James nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Good, because once this story goes live, Linda's not going to be able to hide anymore. The whole city's going to know what she's been doing." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation and nervous energy. Grace worked tirelessly, contacting residents who had been harassed, fined, or bullied by Linda over the years. It was a longer list than I'd expected. Names and faces I barely knew, but all of them carried the same frustration, the same bitterness of having been wronged by a woman who wielded her authority like a weapon. I had thought my case was an isolated incident of one man standing up against a petty tyrant. But Grace showed me that Linda's reach went far beyond my gate. She had been tightening her grip on the community for years, exploiting the bylaws to suit her own purposes, and punishing anyone who dared to question her authority. James Holloway, the reporter Grace had contacted, proved to be relentless. He spent hours interviewing residents, taking notes, and gathering testimony. Grace introduced him to Mary Sanders, the woman who had been forced to tear down her greenhouse, and Paul Jefferson, who still seethed over the destruction of his grandchildren's swing set. There were others, two people whose stories painted a picture of systematic abuse and corruption that went far deeper than I had ever imagined. James seemed thrilled by the sheer volume of material we provided. "This is exactly the kind of story I've been looking for," he said one afternoon as we sat in my living room, stacks of documents spread out before us. "Linda Whitaker is a textbook case of an HOA president gone mad with power. And if I can prove the financial misconduct Grace mentioned, it's going to be explosive." "You're sure you can get this published?" I asked, my nerves fraying with each passing day. "Absolutely," James replied confidently. "My editor loves stories like this. Local corruption, abuse of power, it's the kind of thing people eat up. And once it's out there, Linda's going to have a hell of a time trying to bury it." "What if she tries to come after you?" Grace asked, her voice tinged with worry. James just laughed. "Let her try. This is what I do. Besides, she's not the first HOA president I've tangled with. They all think they're invincible until the public gets wind of their dirty laundry." His words gave me hope, but they also made me nervous. I had spent so long being on the defensive. I wasn't sure I was ready for the kind of full-scale assault. James was preparing to unleash, but Grace's faith in him was unwavering, and I had come too far to turn back now. The day James's article went live, I woke up to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Emails, texts, missed calls, all pouring in with the force of a tidal wave. Grace called me before I even had a chance to read the article myself. "It's everywhere," she said, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "David, he did it." James published the whole thing. I scrambled to find the article online, my fingers shaking as I typed. When the page finally loaded, the headline was like a punch to the gut. "HOA president accused of corruption, harassment, and financial misconduct. The dark side of Fairhaven Oaks." Beneath the headline was a picture of Linda, her face caught in a rare moment of surprise from some HOA meeting months ago. She looked smug, arrogant, exactly the way I had come to know her. I read the article 3 times, my eyes devouring every word. James hadn't pulled any punches. He laid out everything we had given him: the false violations, the harassment, the financial discrepancies. He even included quotes from residents who had been wronged by Linda, names I recognized, people who had once kept their heads down for fear of being targeted. And then there was my story, my fight over the gate, the footage of Linda, Peter, and Mark attempting to break through the lock, the threats and intimidation. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. The article ended with a promise that a full investigation was underway. James had contacted the county authorities, who were already looking into the financial discrepancies Grace had uncovered. And if the investigation proved what we suspected, Linda wouldn't just be losing her position, she could be facing criminal charges. I sat back in my chair, my heart racing. It was happening. The truth was finally coming out. But the victory was short-lived. That afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find 2 police officers standing on my porch, their faces grim. "Mr. Carter?" one of them asked. "That's me," I replied, feeling my pulse quicken. "What's this about?" "We have a warrant to search your property," the officer said, holding out a piece of paper with my name on it. "We've received a complaint alleging illegal modifications and unauthorized installations. The HOA has requested an official inspection." I stared at the officer, my mind reeling. "Are you serious?" "This is Linda's doing. She's trying to retaliate because of the article." "We're just doing our job, sir," the officer replied, his tone apologetic but firm. "If everything's up to code, you have nothing to worry about. But the modifications are on my property," I argued. "I have the right to make changes as I see fit." "The HOA has filed a formal complaint," the officer said. If you want to contest it, you'll need to do so through the proper channels. For now, we need to proceed with the inspection. I wanted to scream, to tell them to get off my property and leave me alone, but I knew that would only make things worse. So I stepped aside, my hands shaking as they walked past me to begin their so-called inspection. Grace arrived just as the officers were wrapping up. I had called her the moment they arrived, my panic spilling out in a rambling mess. She had driven over immediately, her face pale and tight with anger. "This is insane," she said, as we stood on my porch, watching the officers poke and prod around my yard. "Linda must have called in a favor to make this happen." "She's desperate," I said, my voice hollow. "The article must have hit harder than we thought." Grace nodded. "She's trying to discredit you, make you look like the bad guy before the investigation can get off the ground. It's a classic tactic." The officers finished their inspection, their faces neutral, as they handed me a written report. "We'll be submitting this to the HOA," one of them said. "If there are any violations, you'll be notified." They left without another word, their cruiser disappearing down the street like ghosts. I stared at the paper in my hands, my vision blurring with frustration and rage. "She's not going to stop, is she?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No," Grace replied, "but neither are we." The days that followed felt like a bizarre mix of victory and desperation. On the one hand, James's article had done exactly what Grace and I had hoped. People were talking. The scandal was spreading through Fairhaven Oaks like wildfire. Residents who had once been too afraid to speak out were now coming forward, their voices amplified by the article's reach. But Linda wasn't giving up. She was fighting back with everything she had, launching a full-scale attack to undermine my credibility and reputation. The bogus inspection she'd orchestrated had produced a list of supposed violations, everything from improper fencing to unauthorized landscaping. It was ridiculous, but she was using the official report as a bludgeon, trying to force me into compliance, or worse, eviction. The threats escalated. Letters arrived almost daily, each one more aggressive than the last. Linda was trying to paint me as a danger to the community, a troublemaker intent on destroying the harmony of Fairhaven Oaks. It was laughable, but it was also terrifying, because she wasn't just playing by the HOA's rules anymore. She was trying to bury me under a mountain of legal red tape. Grace was relentless, her fury burning hotter with each new attempt Linda made to sabotage me. She called meetings with the other residents who had come forward, organizing them into a unified front. It was a strange thing, watching Grace transform from the quiet, unassuming woman I'd always known into a determined leader. She had taken on the fight, as if it were her own, and I was grateful beyond words. Then, one morning, I got a call from James. "David, you sitting down?" he asked, his voice brimming with excitement. "I can be," I replied, already feeling my pulse quicken. "What's going on?" "I just got off the phone with a source at the county office. The financial investigation? It's moving forward. And it's not looking good for Linda." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart thudding in my chest. Turns out, Grace was right. There's been significant embezzlement going on for years. Thousands of dollars collected for maintenance projects that never happened. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. They're finding discrepancies in every financial report the HOA has submitted for the last decade. Jesus, one breathed, feeling a dizzying mixture of relief and disbelief. "So what happens now?" "The county's launching a full audit," James said. "They're going to be combing through everything: financial records, board minutes, the works. And if what I'm hearing is true, Linda's about to have a very bad day." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bursting out of me like a flood breaking through a dam. After everything she had put me through, after all the threats and harassment and underhanded tactics, Linda was finally going to face the consequences of her actions. But the celebration was short-lived, because even as the investigation ramped up, Linda continued her campaign against me. The threats, the violation notices, the intimidation tactics, all of it continued with ruthless efficiency. She was determined to crush me before the truth could bring her down. Frank kept me updated on the legal side of things. The injunction he had filed against the lien was holding, but barely. Linda was fighting it with everything she had, pulling strings and calling in favors to try and force the issue. It was a brutal, exhausting process, and there were days when I felt like giving up. But then, Grace would show up at my door, her eyes blazing with determination, and I would remember why I was fighting. "You can't let her win, David," she told me one night, her voice fierce. "If she gets away with this, she'll just do it to someone else. Someone who doesn't have the resources to fight back." "I know," I said, my voice thick with exhaustion, "but I'm so damn tired, Grace. It feels like every time I make progress, she just finds a new way to come after me." "Then we hit her harder," Grace said. "We don't stop, not until she's the one on her knees." A week later, it happened. The county released a preliminary report detailing the results of their audit. It was scathing. Linda had been siphoning money from the HOA for years, rerouting funds into personal accounts under the guise of maintenance projects that never existed. Thousands upon thousands of dollars stolen from the community she claimed to protect. James's follow-up article hit the internet like a sledgehammer. The headline was brutal and direct. HOA president faces criminal investigation for embezzlement and abuse of power. Linda's name was plastered across every local news outlet within hours. Interviews with residents who had been wronged by her added fuel to the fire, their stories echoing the same themes of harassment, intimidation, and outright theft. And then the arrests came. Linda was led out of her house in handcuffs, her face pale and stunned. Peter and Mark were also taken in for questioning, their involvement in the financial scheme still under investigation. The entire neighborhood seemed to buzz with a sense of shocked relief, like a collective weight had finally been lifted. But for me, the relief was tempered by something else, something that felt like a hollowness deep inside my chest. I had won. I had exposed Linda's corruption, cleared my name, and protected my home. But the cost had been high. Weeks of stress, fear, and sleepless nights had taken their toll. The day after Linda's arrest, Grace showed up at my door with a bottle of champagne and a smile that looked too big for her face. "We did it," she said, her eyes shining with joy. "You did it." "We did it," I corrected, smiling despite the exhaustion that still clung to me. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Well, it's not over yet," Grace said, her expression turning serious. "There's still a lot of cleanup to do, and we need to make sure this community is never put under the thumb of someone like Linda again." "I know," I replied, "but for now, I think I just want to breathe, just for a little while." Grace laughed, the sound bright and warm. "I think you've earned that." I poured us both glasses of champagne, the bubbles fizzing as they rose to the surface. We clinked our glasses together, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine sense of peace. Grace was right. There was still work to be done. The HOA needed new leadership, new rules to prevent anyone from abusing their power the way Linda had, and I intended to be a part of that change. But for now, I was content to sit in my kitchen with Grace, sharing a drink and reveling in the fact that we had won. The story of my battle against Linda and the corrupt HOA taught me valuable lessons about resilience, courage, and community. It showed me that standing up against injustice isn't just about protecting my own rights. It's about defending the principles of fairness and integrity for everyone. It's about refusing to be bullied, even when the fight feels impossible. I learned that truth has power, but only when we are brave enough to speak it, to document it, and to share it. I couldn't have achieved anything alone. It was Grace's unwavering support and the courage of others who dared to speak out that made all the difference. In life, we often face people who try to exploit their power, manipulate the rules, or silence us through fear. But we must remember that no matter how daunting the challenge, we can prevail when we stand together, armed with truth and determination. The fight for justice is never easy, but it's always worth it. If you found this story inspiring, If you've ever faced bullies or corrupt systems, or if you believe in standing up for what's right, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories of resilience and justice to those who need to hear them most. And remember, you're never alone in the fight for what's right. Let's keep standing strong, together.